So just to give you an idea about why we started ABC, first I just want to give you a little bit of biographical information about myself, because I think that really helps us understand this, why I started this organization. So I devoted my life to Christ at a Young Life summer camp in 1987. This was the summer before my senior year of high school. And then I was on the 6-year plan at University of Florida, and also working with Young Life. And during this time, it was an interesting time to be a newborn evangelical Christian politically, because there was a lot going on. You had Pat Robertson, who ran for president. You had the formation of the Christian Coalition. You had the culture war speech at the 92 convention. So there was just a lot. It was an interesting time to be a newborn Christian and also interested in politics. I ended up getting a degree in political science. And so during this whole time, as I'm learning about my faith, I'm also learning about politics, and also thinking a lot about how those two relate to each other, and really had a lot of questions about what is the proper role of the church and Christians in public life and in politics. So after graduating, I ended up getting a master's degree and then a PhD with a specialization in religion and politics, always thinking about these questions and motivated by these questions. And then my dissertation was actually on the Christian right as well. Also during this time, as far as politically, as I'm thinking about my political views, I've become much more conservative, politically conservative, theologically conservative, and that pretty much guided sort of the direction of my learning during this time. I went to work for the Christian Post and worked there for 8 years as their politics editor. The whole time, very much, like I said, a politically conservative. Wrote some devastating critiques of President Obama. I'm not sure how he recovered from it, but really starting around 2016 or so, I began to notice more what I considered problems happening on my side of the political aisle and among conservatives and in conservative communities, and became much more concerned about the degree of misinformation, the disinformation, and the radicalization taking place among people like me, and being targeted toward people like me, targeted by politicians on the right and media figures on the right who were targeting communities I've been a part of my whole life. And so it was out of that concern that we started American Values Coalition, to start to seek to address, to reach out to the same communities who are being targeted by these radicalizing forces. And so that's what brings us here today. And I'm so thankful for Redeemer. Thanks to David and everyone else here at Redeemer for helping us host our first and now our second conference. And hopefully we'll be able to do a lot more of these. You're going to hear a lot about some book giveaways today. And so the first one, before I introduce our first speaker, there's a QR code on your table. And that QR code will lead you to a pre-survey to get some information from y'all that we'll be able to use. Everyone who fills out the pre-survey, you'll be entered into a drawing for a copy of David French's book, Divided We Fall, America's Secession Threat and How to Restore Our Nation. So be sure to go ahead and start filling that out when you get a chance, and you'll be entered for that drawing. We have 20 copies to give away. Also, we are selling some t-shirts. You may have noticed when you came in, Disagree and Be Friends, or What Would Jesus Post? If you're interested in purchasing one of those, they're $20. Our card reader is not working, so your options now are Venmo or cash. So sorry about that, but this is the things you learn, as you just start, trying to do these conferences. So a learning experience for us here, right? All right. So now let me introduce our first speaker. David French went to Harvard Law School. He also formerly was senior counsel for the American Center for Law and Justice and Alliance Defending Freedom. And he served as president of Foundation for Individual Rights and Education. He also served in the Army Reserves and fought in the Iraq War and was awarded a Bronze Star. This is an interesting part of his biography. He almost kind of sort of ran for president. So the short version is there are some people looking for someone to run for president, and after the first 50 people said no, they were like, David French? Oh, okay. There might be some truth to that story, but yeah. He's currently the senior editor of The Dispatch and a writer for The Atlantic. He's also doing 2 podcasts, Advisory Opinions and Good Faith. The Good Faith podcast is probably one that all y'all would be interested in because it's much more related to pastors. His co-host is Pastor Curtis Chang. So if you're into podcasts, you probably, I suggest checking that one out. And then, of course, the author of the book that we're giving away. So let's give a warm welcome to David French.
So by almost kind of sort of running for president means definitely did not run for president. That's a whole story. And I still don't know if I had a moment of temporary insanity or like somehow got hallucinogenic mushrooms in my food, but I did have about 3 days where I thought about it and before I came to my senses. Welcome. I'm so glad you're here. I'm especially glad you're here because today is September 1st, 2022, which is extremely momentous because this is Rings of Power Day. This is when Amazon Prime's billion-dollar Tolkien adaptation is available, and I'd be watching it right now if I wasn't pre-committed to be here. So I appreciate, well, I don't know, I question your priorities. So what I want to talk to you guys about is a concept called post-partisan Christianity. Post-partisan Christianity. And the reason why I use the phrase post-partisan is because at this point it's very difficult to find someone, especially someone who's engaged in the political issues in our time, who is nonpartisan or who has been nonpartisan. The church is heavily partisan. And it's heavily partisan in multiple directions. It's one of the more interesting statistics for those who think, there was a recent headline, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago from one of these Baptist discernment blogs. And the headline was, David French falsely claims Democrats can be Christian. And we're living in a world in which different American Christian communities are very, very politically engaged and very partisan. The 2 most church-going communities in the United States, aside from Mormons, who put us all to shame, but the 2 most church-going communities in the United States are evangelical Republicans and black Democrats. 2 most church-going communities in the United States. These 2 most church-going communities in the United States happen to be the most bedrock centers of power for each one of the 2 great political parties, and this the most powerful nation in the world. So you have deeply Christian communities, deeply Bible-believing, deeply Bible-believing. No one would look, for example, at the black church in the United States and say, oh, these guys are casual about the Bible. No, deeply Bible-believing communities, bedrock constituencies for the 2 great political parties in the United States, and so therefore it logically flows that American politics is overrun with Christian virtue. No. So what is going on here? What's going on is we have a lot of partisan Christianity. And what do I mean by partisan Christianity? The reason why I would modify the word Christianity with the word partisan is because the partisanship has become so deeply ingrained in the faith that it is a component of the faith, and in some circumstances, the component of the faith, the primary component of the faith. And now, when I'm talking about big trends in American Christianity, you're not going to hear me talk a lot about theology. The reason for that is really pretty simple. People lie to themselves about their theology. They just flat out lie to themselves. If you're going to take somebody who showed up at the Republican National Convention in 2016 or in the social distanced one in 2020, and they've got a Trump hat and they're wearing Trump clothes from head to toe, and you said, what is more important to you? Is it Jesus Christ or Donald Trump? They would say 100% Jesus Christ. 100% Jesus Christ. But then what often ends up happening for a lot of us, we have an intellectual commitment that says, here's my order. My order is Jesus. My order is family. And then it is country. And then way down there is politics. But then we have this sort of lived reality that's completely different. This is the way it is also often with Christian nationalism. So Christian nationalism, a lot of people talk about Christian nationalism now, especially post-January 6th. What is it? And you have a lot of these academic definitions of Christian nationalism and theological definitions of Christian nationalism. And every one of them that I hear, they don't quite get it for me, because I live in an area where I think there's a lot of Christian nationalism. For example, there's a big Baptist church not far from where I live that every July is just surrounded with American flags. Just American flags surround the entire perimeter of the property. But if you got the pastor in a room and you said, okay, what is your theology? His theology would not sound anything like Christian nationalism. But the actions, the emotional emphasis, look a lot like it. I like the way Thomas Kidd from Baylor described Christian nationalism as much less of a set of theological propositions and much more a set of emotional commitments. And that's what partisan Christianity is. It's a set of much more emotional and visceral commitments than it is a set of theological propositions. The example that Thomas Kidd used was in the 2020 campaign. He was driving past a house and it said, Trump 2020, make faith great again. Well, that's not a theological statement, but it is betraying a very visceral, emotional, felt understanding of the stakes of a given presidential election. So what is partisan Christianity and why is it bad? Okay, what is partisan Christianity and why is it bad? Well, I feel like you kind of have to make that case because there's an awful lot of Christians who believe that their partisan commitments flow directly from their faith. If you ask them, why are you a Republican? Or some other folks, why are you a Democrat? It will often begin with, because I'm a Christian, therefore, ... Therefore, I am a Republican. Now, I will freely confess that this is how, I wasn't so much because I'm a Christian, therefore I am a Republican. Mine was because I'm a Christian, therefore I am conservative, therefore I am Republican. That was my step. And so when I began to alter a lot of my thinking was, because I am a Christian, therefore I am a conservative. But then when the Republican Party became less conservative, I became less Republican, but then was accused of being less Christian, but it was less conservative. And now I'm confused. And it began to open my eyes to a lot of different things. So let's sort of walk through what is the problem of partisan Christianity and also what is the solution to partisan Christianity. So what's the problem? Well, first let's define it. And let's define it very simply and with this concept of sort of felt emotional reality. And here's one of my definitions for partisan Christianity. You know you are captured by partisan Christianity when I tell you, let's suppose I have a mythical person here named Steve. And I introduce Steve to you. And there are two things you learn about Steve pretty quickly. One is he says he is a follower of Jesus Christ. And the next thing he says is that he's a Democrat or a Republican. Okay. You know you have a problem with partisan Christianity when learning about their partisan identity casts immediate doubt in your mind about their religious identity. Now, Everyone in here in this room, I'm sure you don't do that. Nobody does that in here. When you hear someone's a Republican, it's irrelevant to whether or not you think they're Christian, but I guarantee you, millions of people are in a position where the instant that they learn that somebody is of an opposing political party, they have a visceral distrust for them. A visceral distrust. And I'm sure some of you have heard of in your own congregations, in your own communities, small groups breaking up over political differences, not theological differences, political differences. And so that's a very short definition of what partisan Christianity is. And so what partisan Christianity does is it takes at an emotional and a visceral level, it takes the theological and puts it underneath the political in your heart first, and then your mind. And where your heart goes, your mind tends to follow. We often get this backwards in the persuasion world. How many here have heard of Jonathan Haidt's analogy of the elephant and the rider? Oh, good. There's only a few. There's a few things I'm going to tell you that are not my ideas, and those things that are not my ideas are the things you should remember. So this, which is not my idea, is a thing that you should remember. The elephant and the rider analogy is very simple. It's this, that the human person is made up of the rider, which is our rational mind. That's what teaches us that 2 + 2 = 4. Obvious facts. Gravity exists. The Southeastern Conference is the best football conference. Like all of these things that are empirically proven facts, that's the rider. That's your rational mind. The elephant is everything else. The elephant is your upbringing. The elephant is where you live. Your elephant is your ethnicity. Your elephant is all the cultural forces that shaped you. That's the elephant. And what Haidt says is we spend most of our persuasion time talking to the rider, but if the elephant doesn't want to move, the rider ain't going anywhere. But if the elephant wants to move, the rider is coming along, okay? Now, as a former trial lawyer, you understand this kind of stuff instinctively. The process of persuading a jury goes something like this. It goes, number one, you want to rule for my client. I'm going to make you want to rule for my client. I'm going to make you like my client. And if you can't make the jury like your client, because some clients are not likable, you're going to make them dislike the other side more, okay? So you're going to make them want to like your client, and then the rest of the time you're going to be filling in the reasons. So here's your emotional commitment, and then here's your rationalization, is the way a lot of persuasion works. It's the way a lot of advertising works. Here's your emotional commitment. This is a pharmaceutical ad. Pharmaceutical ad is going to start with this incredibly amazing, beautiful vista of the perfect life that awaits you if you take this particular drug, and then they'll very quickly tell you, your rider, of the occasional risks that might arise. But the elephant's already persuaded. So they cover their bases with the rider, but the elephant's persuaded. You're headed down that beautiful vista with this drug. And so what we're dealing with partisan Christianity, what I have to understand we're dealing with is the elephant. The elephant. And what is the elephant shaped by? So the elephant is shaped by an enormous number of factors that have very little to do with the intellectual mind. So demographics. Here's one thing that's really fascinating about American Christianity right now. American Christianity is vastly disproportionately Southern. Okay, it is vastly disproportionately Southern. If you look at church attendance statistics, if you look at the statistics of people who declare that religion is very important to their lives, again, taking the Utah outlier, Utah is its own thing, everywhere where religion is most important to people's lives, everywhere where religion, where people actually have a demonstrated faith commitment by regular attendance, that's all deeply in the South. Tennessee, Mississippi, Alabama, Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana, South Carolina, major church attendance statistics. significant church attendance statistics. So what does this mean? It means that the culture of the American South exerts a disproportionate pull on the church as a whole. It has to. If you're a Christian musician, if you are a Christian publisher, if you are in the evangelical industry, you're realizing that your market is going to be driven by, particularly in the white evangelical church, by the Southern church. If you're wanting to write a bestseller, you're not thinking, man, I need to really hit that Christian community in Providence, Rhode Island. You're thinking, if I can get a few big events in Dallas, I'm set. I mean, this is the way the world works. And so what we have to realize is that what passes for evangelical Christianity in the United States has a very distinctive historical geographic center. It has a very distinctive historical geographic center. Now, why does that really matter? I'm going to go into that a little bit more. So American evangelical Christianity is not something that descended or that came to us from Jerry Falwell carrying some tablets from the hills around Lynchburg. Okay? It is a product of a distinct time, place, and history. Doesn't mean that everything in American evangelical Christianity and the white evangelical world is bad or wrong. It just means it's shaped. It's shaped. Okay. Now, how is it shaped? Well, it's shaped in a couple of pretty distinctive ways that are very relevant to American politics today. Okay. So one of the things and one of the questions that we have in American politics is, why is it so toxic? Why is it so personal? Why is it so pugilistic? Why is it so combative? And why is it that the American Christian community isn't putting the brakes on that? It's contributing to it. Not everybody, but as a general rule, if you're going to talk about American Christian commitments to politics, you don't see a cultural distinction between the way in which the world does politics and the way in which Christians do politics, except on discrete issues. So the definition of Christian engagement in politics might be, I'm a Christian in politics because I'm pro-life and I'm for religious liberty. But you're going to see very little distinction in the way in which a secular person and a Christian person who's deeply involved in politics interacts. You're going to see the same kind of hostility. You're going to see the same kind of pugilism. You're going to see the same kind of desire to strike back and punch hard. Why is that? Why is that? Well, there's a part of the elephant of a disproportionately Southern community that needs to be outed, okay? That needs to be outed, that's deep. It's deep. All right, here's one of the pieces of the elephant pie here. Man, that's a mixed metaphor. All right. Shame, honor, culture. Shame, honor, culture. Okay. Now, this is something that Americans tend to talk about when you go to the Middle East. So when I deployed to Iraq, we received briefings in shame, honor, culture, and the way in which you could disrespect or insult somebody in the Middle East, and it could create a violent confrontation because you dishonored them. And I remember sitting through one of those briefings and thinking, well, that's Kentucky. I know this world. Shame, honor, culture. What is shame, honor, culture? Shame, honor, culture is a culture that has heavily marked the American South. Heavily marked it. And so what happens in shame, honor, culture, and one of the great descriptions of shame, honor, culture comes from a scholar who is writing about the literature of the American South. And he says, the regard of the American Southerner lives in the gaze of the other. In other words, what someone else thinks of them becomes a dominant characteristic and a dominant feeling in their a dominant aspect of their experience. And once you see this, you cannot unsee this. Why is it that the business model of right-wing media is constant grievance? They don't like you. They look down on you. They have insulted you. They did this to you. It is constant grievance. Why? Because it pings that shame, honor aspect of our existence, that it's deeply and culturally ingrained disproportionately within the white evangelical church. which creates a sense of almost an involuntary anger response. There's this fascinating University of Michigan study from the 1990s where they took guys who are raised in the North and they took guys who are raised in the South and exposed them to the exact same stimulus of someone bumping into them in the hallway. And the guys who are raised in the South, they immediately had an elevated fight or flight response. Like their chemical reaction in them, it was immediate. And I'll never forget. So I grew up, I was born in Opelika, Alabama, raised in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Nashville, Tennessee, and Georgetown, Kentucky. Like, I come by my Southeastern Conference street cred honestly here. First ever football game I ever attended, I was 6 years old, Death Valley, LSU. My dad was afraid to bring me, it was so rowdy, but I could handle it. So I remember going to law school and getting on the T, the Boston subway system, and people were rude. And I was angry, like involuntarily angry. I felt a heightened sense of that fight or flight. Why are you being rude? Because in the South, you know how it is. If I bump into someone at a restaurant, oh, I'm sorry, my bad. You know, like this is the normal way of interacting. You bumped into somebody in Boston, it's just like, boom, keep walking. What, we got to settle this. But we have this involuntary shame, honor response. It's a big part of our culture. It's a big part of our elephant, okay? What else do we have that is an aspect of ourselves, our culture, in a disproportionately Southern white evangelical community? Highly individualized theology of justice. Highly individualized theology of justice. Why? Why would this come out of the South? Maybe if you have hundreds of years from 1619 to, not to use a trigger date, 1619 to 1964, you have hundreds of years of state-enforced racial bigotry defended by violence in the most Christian region of the United States. How do you harmonize those two things? How do you harmonize them? Well, one of the ways in which you harmonize those two things is by making virtue highly individual, okay? I am a good person. The object of Christianity is to convert you specifically to the gospel. And so what Christianity becomes is almost entirely a vertical relationship. We're a bunch of telephone poles walking around our community. Where it's all vertical. We're not cross-shaped. Where our responsibilities and our relationship and our virtue relationship isn't just north-south between us and God, it's east-west between us and our neighbor. And so what has ended up happening in Southern evangelical culture is there was very little attention paid to the idea. Now, this is in the white evangelical church. The black church has a different view on this. Very little attention paid to, and I'm going to use another tough word, systemic injustice. Very little attention paid to that. Because, and you probably hear this now, the solution to injustice is the gospel, meaning individual conversion. The more individual conversions you have, the more justice will result. But history demonstrates that's false. That's just false. Unless you have horizontal obligations inculcated as part of those individual conversions, injustice will persist. How do we know this? Well, I guarantee you in Selma in the 1960s, the guy aiming the fire hose at the protesters, civil rights protesters, many of them were in church every Sunday. Every Sunday, and yet they were holding the fire hose. But right now, when we fight about race, you see echoes of this all the time. So therefore, if you have a culture shaped by these elephant aspects, how can we say how can we say that this culture that has resulted is sort of the manifestation of Christianity in politics? It's not. It is not. So what ends up happening as a result of this kind of elephant-based cultural Christianity mixed with partisanship? Well, one of the things that happens is identity politics. And Republican Christians are supposed to be super opposed to identity politics, but they're super immersed in it. They're supposed to be super opposed, but they're super immersed. And what do I mean by identity politics? I'll give you a perfect example. I was having one of only 50 million email exchanges with friends over Trump back in 2016. And one of the arguments made to me was, well, you need to support Trump because he's going to fill his administration with evangelicals. Evangelicals will be pushing on an open door into his administration. And guys, this is a version of identity politics, right? If you get the right people from the right demographic in power, justice will prevail. Well, we had a problem. Yeah, my friend was right. Evangelicals had a lot of access in the Trump years. They had a lot. They were, in fact, pushing on an open door. In fact, on January 6th, 2021, at this point, the chief of staff, Trump's chief of staff, outspoken evangelical. One of Trump's lead lawyers, outspoken evangelical, had come from James Dobson's outfit. Some of the leading folks in the U.S. Senate, Josh Hawley, Ted Cruz, outspoken evangelicals. In the House, I worked with one of them, a guy named Mike Johnson. He was outspoken evangelical, used to be a colleague at Alliance Defending Freedom. What did all of them have in common? Absolute commitment to overturning the results of an American election. Absolute commitment. So the identity politics doesn't work. You had the dream evangelical lineup. If you told 1988 David French, in 2006, evangelicals will be so successful in politics that they will populate an administration from top to bottom, including people who worked with James Dobson James Dobson Focus on the Family? Yeah, worked with James Dobson. There will be people in the Senate who have written about the Pelagian heresy in Christianity today. Fantastic. Justice must be reigning, rolling down righteously from the heavens. No, actually, they're going to attempt a coup. Identity politics, not great. Now, another thing that happens, package deal ethics. Now, this is a concept articulated by Tim Keller in a New York Times op-ed that got him universally loved across the religious spectrum. But he basically said, look, let's suppose you are, I have mythical Steve here with me. And I'm like, Steve, why are you a Republican? Well, I'm a Republican because I'm pro-life. Got it. Respect that. Absolutely respect that. That's the primary reason I was Republican. Or you have Steve as a Democrat. Steve, why are you a Democrat? Well, I'm very much concerned with racial equality. Totally respect that, Steve. That's a very good reason. Well, the goal then becomes, well, why, if I'm a Republican because I'm pro-life, well, then what that means is to accomplish the thing that I want to accomplish, advance life or advance racial equality in the U.S., my team has to win. My team has to win. Okay. Well, what if my teammate, my candidate, really doesn't focus on my issue very much? They're not all that into it. Well, what am I going to end up doing? To get my team into office, I'm going to talk about the things that they want to talk about to get into office. And the next thing you know, as a Republican, what you end up talking about is maybe your key issue 1/10 of the time, and things that are not so key to you 90% of the time, because you got to win on the 90% things that you're talking about to get that 10% thing that you actually really care about, and then you end up buying into this package deal. It's this package deal of everything that the party stands for, you're ending up being on the ramparts for, not because you particularly care about it, but because you want to advance the one thing you want to advance. But then you wake up one morning and you realize, I hadn't been talking about that for months. I've been talking about these other things with extreme passion, with extreme anger sometimes. But the package deal means if you're buying into the political party on one thing, You often, as a practical matter, find yourself buying into it on everything. You're tied to it. And sometimes this can induce whiplash, absolute whiplash. I'll give you a perfect example. In 2020, one of the big arguments for supporting Republicans is that Democrats, if they won, were going to bring new states into the Union. Puerto Rico, notably, and Washington, D.C. And if the Democrats brought in new states, they would cement their control forever and America would fall, okay? Well, I have, who watches Ted Lasso? Oh, this is a good crowd, okay. So you know from Ted Lasso, the science of the goldfish memory, which is goldfish have the smallest memory of any living creature, alleged. I don't know if that's right. I mean, Ted Lasso said it, but whatever. But I actually am not a goldfish. So I have memory beyond goldfish time. And what I knew was that in 2016, the Republican National Convention party platform was statehood for Puerto Rico. Okay? So my commitment as a Republican has to be statehood for Puerto Rico in 2016, statehood for Puerto Rico is just in 2016, in 2020 it will ruin the Republic. What? No, it just means the political winds changed, but we get tied to the ethics of the underlying argument regardless of whether or not we actually know about it or even frankly care about it. It's the package deal ethics. And put these things together, identity politics, package deal ethics, and you have the classic will to power. It's the classic will to power, which basically says, look, it's the most seductive thing which says justice is tied to my power. Isn't that convenient? Like, isn't that convenient? What a wonderful thing. That way I can be extraordinarily ambitious and feel not just okay about it, great about it, because my ambition advances justice. We don't see how seductive that is. So here we are, a community of people shaped by history and culture, often as much or more than theology and scripture, formed into identity politics that says that people like me need to win, tied into package deal ethics where we're buying onto a whole suite of partisan policies that we may not know about or care about, and then ultimately vindicated in our will to power. So other than those things, partisan Christianity is great. So what's the answer? What's the answer? The answer is what I call post-partisan Christianity. And what is the simple test of what post-partisan Christianity is? It's, again, a lot of this is going to be visceral and emotional, not just theological and intellectual. And I feel like you are going to know that you're emerging from partisan Christianity when you meet Mythical Steve. And when you hear that Mythical Steve is a follower of Jesus, the next descriptors don't matter. Okay, whether you hear they're Republican or they're Democrat, Alabama fan. No, I don't know. I have lines. But you have, once they're a follower of Jesus, whether they're a Republican or Democrat, at a visceral, emotional level, doesn't factor. That's when you're moving into post-partisan Christianity. And one of the things about post-partisan Christianity is post-partisan Christianity takes the whole counsel of Scripture. It takes the whole counsel of Scripture. So I'm going to share with you two verses. The first one, if you listen to me at all, you've heard me use this all the time. So you're like, okay, here comes Micah 6:8. Micah 6:8. What does the Lord require of you, O man? What is good? It is to act justly. Okay, so that does not mean that the post-partisan Christian just sits this one out, right? I'm above and out of politics. We'll let you heathens squabble. I'm just going to sit out here and be nice. That's not what post-partisan Christianity is. For the first requirement, act justly. So justice should be a deep concern of a post-partisan Christian. Should be a deep concern. You don't get to opt out of justice, all right? Well, in this highly polarized age, you think, yep, I'm in there. I know what's right. I know who needs to win and who needs to lose. But then we keep going. Act justly, love kindness. Oops. Now, this is where you suddenly start to get massively countercultural. Massively. I'm going to talk about this tonight, but animosity right now in the United States of America is escalating through the roof. The amount of partisan animosity in this country is simply staggering, and it's escalated dramatically since 2016, and it was bad before 2016. Nobody should think that American politics was functioning fine before Donald Trump came along. No. Going back to 2014, the Pew Foundation had some studies of partisanship that said, if you ask the average Republican, do they strongly dislike, somewhat dislike, strongly like, or somewhat like a person, a Democrat, 82% of Republicans would say they strongly dislike or somewhat dislike the average Democrat. That's in 2014. Democrats, as befitting the reputation of the party of tolerance, were more tolerant. Only 78% of them had strong dislike or somewhat dislike for Republicans. So this is something that's been happening for a while. So the love-kindness aspect of this becomes very, very difficult. But it's just as mandatory as the command to act justly. And then it gets harder still. Walk humbly before the Lord your God. Walk humbly. Well, how do I have a proper argument about how to fix racial justice in the United States with humility when I'm right? Walking humbly, I think, I often think of, when I talk to students about this, I think, okay, as a practical matter, let's reverse the order, just as a practical human relations matter. If you're, let's stick with the racial equality, racial justice aspect of this. If you think at age 22, you figured this out, you got a humility problem. If I think at age 53, I figured this out, I've got a humility problem. So what I need to be able to do when I'm walking into discourse in this is to begin and to lead with the fact that I don't have the answers. I want to hear from you. I value your perspective because I don't know it all. This is hard. And when you open yourself up and you have the vulnerability to be properly humble in your interaction with others, kindness flows out of that. Kindness flows out of that. But then when you're open enough to hear from other people and you're kind enough to where they feel safe and they feel as if their view is welcome, you're actually going to have more information and critically more relationships to achieve justice once you're able to discern it. I love John Stuart Mill's argument for free speech. John Stuart Mill says, look, free speech is pretty much going to be always beneficial to you in this sense. Number one, let's just begin with the proposition, you're not God, okay? You don't know everything. And so if you have a view that is wrong and free speech exposes you to a view that's correct and you change your mind as a result, free speech has been great for you. You've gone from error to truth. And I think humility and kindness in interactions helps with that. But let's suppose you're not wrong. Let's suppose you're very right about something and you hear an alternative point of view. Of what value is that to you? It's of immense value because it's going to help you learn the values and ideas of opponents. And also critically, it's going to help you sharpen your own thinking in a way of persuading other people of your position that might ultimately be correct. So free speech has benefited you. But free speech flourishes in relationships that are founded in humility and kindness. All right, so that's a Micah 6:8 version of what post-partisan Christianity looks like. Here's the 1 Timothy 1:7. And this one might even be harder because it begins, God did not give us a spirit of fear. Okay, the spirit of fear is the foundational premise of modern American politics right now. I had this debate with Eric Metaxas. I had two, actually. The first one was at the Q Ideas Conference where he began the debate by dropping the F-bomb. And then Q censored that out. And I'm like, no, you need to leave it in so you can like see the fullness of the mindset here. But anyway, his basic premise was you vote for Donald Trump or America falls. America is over. He amplified that when we debated later at John Brown University. He said if Joe Biden wins, we will not be able to have gatherings like this. The police will shut them down. Okay? That is fear-based motivation. It's almost textbook fear-based motivation. And yet, Paul says God did not give us a spirit of fear, but of what? Power. Okay, let's pause right there. Power. Our power? Our power? Who's he talking to? He's talking to the church in the first century. Has no power. I mean, they're nobody's constituency. It's not like Caesar is saying, you know, if I motivate enough evangelicals in Thessalonica, I'm going to really come out ahead in the electoral. No. Power. Whose power? Our power comes from the Holy Spirit of the living God. Our power doesn't come from a political position. Power, and the next one, love, and then the last one, sound mind. Yikes. In an era of misinformation and conspiracy theories, I mean, like, Bonnie doesn't just have a whole album side, she's got a book on that. Power and love and of sound mind. Why do I bring these things up? I bring these things up because when we talk about Christians and politics, you'll notice that 90% of the discussion is the what. What do you stand for? What's your political position? Less than 10% is the how. How do you live? How do you behave? Now think about this, how strange this is in our Christian life. In our Christian life, if you have to go to a seminar about being a Christian businessman or a Christian business person, it is not, here's just how to make all the money in the world. The what of being in business. A lot of it is going to be, if it's anything decent at all, how do you treat your colleagues? How do you show the love of Christ towards your customers? How do you show the love of Christ to your employees? How do you show the love of Christ to your peers? Marriage counseling isn't, all right, get to 50th anniversary. It's how do you live that day-to-day life? Christian students, it's not how to make all A's. It is how do you live as a Christian, a gospel-oriented Christian in sometimes tough environments. It's so much about the how, the fruit of the Spirit, kindness, love. That's what it's all about. Then we move into politics and it's the issues. It's the issues. And we don't talk about the how. We don't talk about kindness. We don't talk about the fruit of the Spirit. We don't talk about it at all. And why not? Why not? Now this is where the fear-based reasoning starts to come in. Why not? Because you see, David, you idiot, in politics, kindness doesn't work. The fruit of the Spirit don't work. If you have somebody in politics who is loving their enemies, is blessing those who persecute them, who is kind, who demonstrates humility, they're going to get eaten alive because, say it with me, politics ain't beanbag. Okay? Who's heard that statement? Politics ain't. Whoever said it was. Like, only beanbag is beanbag. But politics ain't it doesn't work. It doesn't work. And what's important in politics is what works. There was this article written, had the very catchy title a couple of years ago called Against David Frenchism. And one of the core complaints against David Frenchism, and he was really giving me way too much credit, is that he says, I put civility and decency as first order values when they should be second order values. That civility and decency had to take a back seat to the urgency of the moment. Well, I was at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary a couple months ago, and I got in the Q&A one of these questions. Well, what books are you reading right now to help you in these times? Great question, and I answered with the most evangelical pat answer ever. I said, the Bible. And I said, but, and here's what I mean when I say the Bible is helping me get through these times. I started rereading the New Testament with the eye towards this. Every syllable of the New Testament was written to an oppressed community. And not just an oppressed community in the sense of cancel culture and Twitter shaming, okay? An oppressed community in the sense of crucifixion and lions, okay? That's the community. that this is written towards. And Paul is telling them, don't have a spirit of fear, but of power and love and of sound mind. Paul is telling them, and Jesus is telling them about loving your enemies, blessing those who persecute you, in an environment that is unimaginably more difficult for Christians. Unimaginably. I was just trying to put myself in like this, as much as I could, about in a first century mindset. And I was thinking about a lot of the scandals that we've had lately. And why is it that so many Christians are willing to circle their wagons around corrupt individuals out of this sense of cultural siege that they're under, just the siege mentality? And you would begin, like, let's say, you've got Theophilus sitting here, he's teleported in. First, he's gobsmacked at how many people are in this room, like stunned. I cannot believe this many people are in the room. And then the second thing you say, well, Theophilus, let me tell you about, Kanakuk camps, okay? What's Kanakuk camps? Well, it's this huge Christian camp, 20,000, stop right there. 20,000 kids a summer go through this camp? Yeah. Well, anyway, keep up. I've got a story. And you walk through, and then you reach to the point where you're explaining why so many people are reluctant to hold the camp accountable for sheltering one of the worst child sex predators in modern American history, because they're too afraid that this institution could fall. I'm sorry, I get angry when I think about this. I get angry when I think about this. But kindness doesn't work, you see. It doesn't work. Well, tell that to Jesus. He went into a position where the people in Israel were oppressed beyond a level we could possibly imagine. He loved his enemies. He blessed those who persecuted. He didn't have a will to power. He died on a cross with like 5 friends left at his feet. And now he's on his name is on a billion lips in Caesar Augustus. Who is that? Right? Don't tell me it doesn't work. Please. But here's the reality. So, post-partisan Christianity has a great reward to it. And I'm going to tell you why. And it's often not all that attractive to people, to be honest. What does post-partisan Christianity have to offer you today to give you your best life now in 2022? What it has to offer for you today, I submit, is something that looks a lot like the cross. Here's what it has to offer to you today, right now. It has to offer to you a lot of anger bordering on persecution. Because how dare you not join the team? How dare you weaken our cause by seeing the humanity of other people? How dare you cast doubt on our sense and our idea of justice? And the response, and many pastors in this room know this, no matter the size of your public platform, whether you've got hundreds of thousands of Twitter followers, or whether you've got 2,000, 3, 5, 10,000 in your congregation, or 100, or maybe you're just a person posting on Facebook to friends and family, one of the first things you're going to experience and one of the first things that you're going to encounter is what I call cattle prod culture. It is being immediately shocked by vitriol and anger and trying to shock you into compliance and to move you back in with the herd. It's a constant shock. It's a constant pang of pain. And it may even be sort of our own version. Thank God we don't live in a time where there's actually real persecution. But it may cost you a job. It may cost you a career. It may cost you relationships. My wife and I, we have something in 2016 when we began to really depart from sort of the Republican world. We made a vow which was simply this: we're not going to end friendships over politics. We're just not going to do that. We're not going to cast aside people we love because they disagree with us on politics. But at the same time, we couldn't guarantee that that wouldn't happen to us. And oh my goodness, what has occurred in these last several years. Some people know some of the stories, but beginning in 2015, when I came out publicly against Trump, one of the first things that happened was that pictures of my youngest daughter, she was 7 years old at the time, were put all over Twitter, photoshopped into gas chambers by far-right Trump supporters. We began a campaign, a reign of terror directed at our family that continues to this day, involving threats, involving harassment, involving bomb threats, involving people trying to force their way into our house, people casing our house. That was what awaited us, and we had no idea. We had no idea that that would occur. There's nothing quite like giving a speech and then stepping down, and I put my phone on Do Not Disturb and silent and all that when I speak, and then turning it back on when I finish the Q&A, and the phone is buzzing like crazy because it's the FBI calling you. Because remember the Trump superfan bomber, Cesar Sayak, who he sent bombs. They were intended to work. These were not fake bombs. It sent bombs to Robert De Niro and Nancy Pelosi and Jake Tapper. Well, he looked me up. I was talking to the FBI agent. It was kind of funny. I said, wait a minute. Nancy Pelosi, Jake Tapper, Robert De Niro, me. One of these things is not like the other. And the FBI agent, God bless him, said, don't sell yourself short. I read you all the time. But there's a lot of truth to the statement that says, well, it doesn't work in a purely by the metric of working that the world adopts. Punch them back, hit them back, hit them back. That works. You tend to win. You get what you want. The other side loses. But that was not the way of the cross. That's not the way of the cross. Jesus didn't say to us, I took up the cross so that you don't have to. Okay? That is not what he says. He says to us, take up the cross. That's what he says to us. And that is about as countercultural as you can possibly imagine. So what is post-partisan Christianity ultimately? What post-partisan Christianity ultimately is trying to do, and when I say post-partisan, I don't mean you don't vote for a Republican or a Democrat. It doesn't even mean you don't run for office as a Republican or a Democrat. It means that what is your identity? How do you identify yourself? What is fundamentally the core of who you are? And if partisanship is in that core, that's where you're going to run aground. That's where you're going to go astray. So what is the ultimate promise of post-partisan Christianity? And this is one reason why a lot of people don't necessarily love the idea, to be honest. The alternative is a recommitment to Christianity as seen and as explained and as outlined and articulated at great length in Scripture. In great length in Scripture, imitation of Christ to the point of taking up the cross. That's what it is. And we often get that in marriage. We often get that in parenting. We often get that in business. How many times have you met a Christian business person who's facing financial ruin? And let's suppose that, personal financial struggles can be catastrophic. Just catastrophic. They can wreck marriages. They can wreck relationships with kids. This is serious stuff. And a faithful Christian, you go to them and you go, you know what? All of your problems will go away if you just lie a little more. Well, the Christian would go, whoa, 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 whoa. I hear what you're saying. A little light consumer fraud might help me a lot. But I'm a follower of Jesus Christ. I have faith that He loves me. I have faith that He is in control of my life and my family's life. I'm not going to lie. Okay, you're not going to lie? All right, hire somebody who will lie. Hire a liar. You're not lying. You're not lying. No. I'm not going to use my power or the authority given to me by my position in this firm to delegate my lying and hatred to somebody else. so that I can weather this crisis? If you say that in a Christian business meeting, people will be like, well, of course. Now translate to politics. Translate to politics. That's different, is it? Is it? How do we use our power? How do we use our authority? I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to be cruel. I'm just going to hire the liar. I'm just going to hire the liar. Well, why are you hiring the liar? Well, you have to understand how bad things are. Every now and then you need a little liar, or maybe a big liar, because things are bad now. What message does that give to the world? What the message that gives to the world is when the chips are down, when it really matters, when our heart is really implicated in a fundamental way, all of these values we talk about are optional. All of those values are optional. And that's fundamentally contradictory from the example of the cross. Because what did Jesus say when he was hanging on the cross, unjustly executed by an imperial power that was oppressing the people of Israel? The very people who were killing him, he said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. How much more of an oppressive moment can you get, and how much more of a loving response can you have? And we actually take the position that the times are just too tough for that kind of virtue for us? Man, that's not the testimony that we want to be giving to this world. All right, I think it's time for y'all to have a discussion. I had meant to leave some time for Q&A, and I don't think I did. Okay, Q&A after lunch. All right, so there's a discussion question, and it is this. Here's the discussion question. Because we've talked a lot about the how of how we should interact. What is the greatest barrier to members of your congregation exhibiting the fruit of the Spirit in the political realm? What is the practical barrier that you are seeing to members of your congregation or maybe your pastoral peers exhibiting the fruit of the Spirit in the political realm? Right? Thank you all very much.